going to introduce you to Pastor Don McKenzie, Rabbi Ted Falcon, and Imam Jamal Rahman, the Interfaith Amigos.
First, we posed for pictures.
Too close, too close.
Okay. So it's our pleasure to be here, and we do want to leave room for some questions. So we do invite you, if you have questions to any one of us, or just about the whole faith enterprise or spirituality, particularly as it focuses perhaps on medicine, we invite you to share those. We might not have any answers for them, right. But we wanted to give you some idea of who we are and how we got together. Because at the beginning of our meeting, we actually had no idea that we would be in an osteopathic medical school in West Virginia 12 and a half years later. I am a rabbi of the Reform Jewish tradition, which is the largest group of Jews in the United States. And my interest has always been in the interface of spirituality and psychology. So I am a rabbi, and also I have a PhD in clinical psychology, and have kind of combined those disciplines over more years than any of you have been alive. We're starting to learn now that as a consequence of our age, we often make references to cultural phenomena that nobody has any idea what we're talking about. So if we do that, just raise your hand and we'll try to explain. We started essentially after 9/11. When 9/11 happened, that tragic day and the aftermath, we were flooded with negative images of Islam. And the first person I called, actually that day, was Jamal. Now, Jamal and I had never worked together, but we met each other. We were asked to serve on a board of a group that was striving to start a university to offer a master's degree in spirituality. So I was the identified spiritual rabbi, and he was the identified spiritual imam in the city of Seattle. And I invited Jamal to come to the Shabbat service, the Friday night service that week, to offer a different face of Islam to the community. And as you can imagine, the attendance was overflowing. There were people out to the sidewalk and the street. We enjoyed working together. We'd never actually heard each other teach, but it was, I think we offered inspiration to each other and decided to keep working together.
We became, and these are the key words, we became friends. We connected on a human, personal level. I'll get back to that, but let me introduce myself. My name is Jamal Rahman. I am from a country called Bangladesh, which is a few blocks away, as you know. You know, it is half the size of Oregon. Oregon has about 7 million people. We have the entire half of the population of the US in that small area. So we are really, really packed. So we know how to be good friends with the other. We have no choice. So, as I was saying, we became friends. We connected, I said, on a human level. And I want to suggest to you, and this is probably one of the greatest learnings of interfaith or how to overcome polarization. of all the techniques, the best one is how can one create an environment, or how can one really learn the art of connecting with the other without any secret agenda on a human level. So we connected. Later on, we also connected with Brother Don. And because we connected, I always say publicly that I found that both Rabbi Ted and Pastor Don were two of the best Muslims I knew.
Which you can imagine thrilled us no end.
We became good friends, me and Ted, our families, our congregations, and then any interfaith work in the state of Washington State, we were the usual suspects. And of course, we realized that we are two brothers working, and later on Don, but that we are cousins and we belong to the same Abrahamic family, but a very, very, very dysfunctional family. And that is why you see the three of us from those three monotheistic traditions, because the problems lie with us. So anyhow, we started working together. We realized our third cousin was missing. That's where Pastor Don comes in.
Thanks, Jamal. I knew Ted in the Seattle Christian Jewish Dialogue, and we had started to become friends when 9/11 happened. And I had seen Jamal's picture in a magazine, and it was the kind of magazine that led me to think I would like him.
Jamal was the centerfold. It was really.
That's right. In a spiritual sort of way. Yes.
I'm going to have to. That's good. I'm going to remember that. I like that. So when after 9/11, Ted called me about 6 months later and said he and Jamal and some others were planning an event to mark the first anniversary of 9/11, and would I like to be a part of that, and could it be at my church, University Congregational United Church of Christ in Seattle? And I said yes, and we had the event, an all-day series of workshops and a interfaith worship that evening, and as we were debriefing it, we three looked at each other and basically said, we can't stop now. Not having a clue, as Ted has already said, what that really meant. But let me take a moment to introduce myself. I am a Protestant minister in the Free Church tradition of the Congregationalists, which now is mostly referred to as the United Church of Christ. I was ordained as a Presbyterian 44 years ago. That's because that's the collar, which I wear in this setting to symbolize the yoke or devotion to the cause of the gospel of Jesus. And I'm proud to do that, even though there have been times, as you know, when the collar has been a source of repression for non-Christian people. Until last April, I lived in Seattle, and we met often. We've been meeting weekly, actually for spiritual direction, to get to know each other and so forth, because we believed, we each brought an intuition that if we could penetrate the barriers that have separated our traditions, something healing could come from it. Last April, I moved to Minnesota, where I'm happy to report all the people really are above average and impervious to cold. It's been below zero a lot since December 1st. We moved there to be closer to relatives and so forth. So we started to meet weekly, and we did start to get to know each other, and that was really a blessing. We hadn't started out saying we have to get to know each other, but we did. We started to meet weekly. We started to present programs together, searching in a way in the dark for the ways in which interfaith dialogue could become could reach more deeply into the areas of healing and reconciliation. In November of 2005, we led a group of 44 Christians and Jews to the Middle East and toured to different biblical sites, and we each gave a teaching on those sites and so forth. And then I decided to retire from my congregation to devote full time to interfaith work. We had had a radio program for a year, a weekly radio program, which gave us even more of an opportunity to work together and to see how we could collaborate. Ted retired from his congregation in 2000, at the end of 2009, and Jamal, God bless him, will never retire.
That's right. As long as my hair stays on.
Amen.
Yes.
Like an osteopath.
Yeah, like an osteopath, okay. We published our first book, Getting to the Heart of Interfaith, the eye-opening, hope-filled friendship of a pastor, a rabbi, and an imam, in June of 2009, and our second book came out in October of 2011, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And we've been on the road ever since. We've made probably 180 presentations and spoken to so many people and had the opportunities like this one, where the questions really became the substance of our second book, and now we're getting ready, we think, to write a third book.
Your questions will be the fuel for our third book. We say, inshallah, God
The
willing.
second book is Religion Gone Astray, What We Found at the Heart of Interfaith.
Why it's special to be here.
Okay. We can't tell you how happy we are to be here. This is so exciting, and the reason, of course, as you probably have guessed, is that our mission and yours intersect at the need for healing and wholeness. Wholeness, of course, being another word for salvation. Salvation, to salve, is to make whole. And so our business and yours is to contribute to the healing of individuals, to communities, and to all of creations. The problem, of course, and we don't have to tell you this, is that the medical community and the religious spiritual community have not necessarily worked well together. That is changing. I've been a pastor for 44 years, and when I started visiting hospitals, I wasn't particularly welcome. I think most of the MDs there thought I was getting in the way. But last Thursday, let's see, what's today? Thursday. Last Tuesday night, we were all in Seattle, and I had dinner with two friends who are both chaplains in hospitals in Seattle. They're CPE supervisors, Clinical Pastoral Education, which is a program for ministers, especially, and rabbis and imams actually working as chaplains in medical facilities. But they told me that now doctors are starting to take CPE. In other words, they will start to understand how it feels to be in the role of a pastor or doing pastoral work in a medical center. So the reason why we're here is that we have a common vocation.
What particularly excites me, if I had to summarize it, about this institution and others like this, is that you are open to doing not only the outer work, which is essential, but also the inner work in different ways. And as I was thinking, as you're talking, there's a most popular Islamic story, a true story, which actually many Muslims even don't know, about, the story is well known, I think you'll know the story, but the origin actually is from a most beloved female sage in Islam named Rabia. Anybody know her? Anybody know her? Rabia? Wonderful. She was trying very hard to impart a teaching. And people heard but didn't quite listen. So one day, and here's a story you know, in the 8th century, in those days no electricity, she's looking for a lost key under those pillars with lights on fire on it. Looking and looking for the key, cannot find the key. She's so famous, the entire town joins in, and they cannot find the key. Then they approach and say, "Beloved Rabia, can you sort of tell us whereabouts you might have dropped it so that we can better direct our search?" They said, "Actually, I didn't lose it here. I lost it miles away in my house over there." They say, "You lost it there, looking for it here? Why?" She said, "Simple. You see, my house has no light at all. There's so much more light out here." So they all laugh, and she says, "Oh, you have laughed, which tells me you're intelligent people." She says, "Now you tell me, when you have lost your joy, your peace, because of a failed relationship out there, something which didn't transpire, and you spend all your energy fixing this, fixing that out there, did you actually lose it out there, or did you actually lose it inside you here, inside that house? But of course, there is so much less light inside here. So of course we must look outside, but we must also critically do the inner work in whatever form it takes place."
Several years ago, I was going through an adventure with blood pressure. You probably have blood pressure too.
Before exams, probably, yes.
And I'd gone to a series of cardiologists with whom I didn't feel comfortable. And I finally called a friend who was a heart surgeon at UW, and University of Washington, and I said, who would you suggest I go to? And he gave me the name of someone. And I walked into this guy's office, and when he came in, within the first 10 or 15 seconds, I knew that something different was available. And the best way I could describe it was he was present. He and I, over the years, have become very good friends. Yesterday was his birthday, so we happened to be traveling. As we talked over the years, he sees his profession as his ministry. That doesn't mean he sees himself as a minister. It means his own practice has to do with entering into a kind of relationship with those he sees that has a component that is not covered by the word clinical. It's personal. And more than personal, it's spiritual. Now I mention him, and I mention that moment because the blood pressure actually was the least of the concern. I mean, that specific issue and the medications, that was taken care of very quickly. But he introduced me to a spiritual relationship that was a healing relationship with a physician. It's in a way a tall order because it's not easy to find physicians in this day and age when people often have to see so many people in so short a time. But I think that's part of what the interface is between spirituality and medicine. Like, what can we bring, what do spiritual traditions bring that can support you in developing the capacity to be present with a person who is hurting or a person who is afraid? And it doesn't come just by way of thinking. It comes by way of stepping into an open-heartedness and what increasingly is called presencing. And presencing is the capacity to be in a moment before judgment, before any kind of critical analysis, to be in the present with another person. What comes from our tradition to support that kind of presencing are spiritual practices. And one of the primary spiritual practices that we'd like to talk about briefly is meditation. In Jewish tradition, the word for meditation is hitbodedut, which literally translated means being alone with oneself. One of the ways, I suppose, of understanding would be to say, that on a verbal level we share a multitude of words. But when we enter into a space of silence, it's the same silence. There are many words, but there's only one silence. There are levels of awareness, there is a consciousness which flows through each and every one of us that is prior to the individuation and the individualization that comes through each of us. And so we'd like to talk briefly and illustrate briefly from each of our traditions the meditative process.
Thanks, Brother Ted. So we'll begin with Christian meditation, or meditation in the Christian tradition. And before I do that, I want to just say a word about forgiveness, because that's going to be a part of your part of the practice here. As you know, as physicians and people studying to be physicians, forgiveness, or the lack of forgiveness, can be such an enormous part of the need for healing. Whether it has to do with our own need for forgiveness, or our own need to forgive someone else, our need to feel forgiven by ourselves, by others, or by God, the Holy One of Being. Forgiveness comes into every office in a way, in every situation, because it's so badly needed. I've learned from my colleagues, and I would say this is one of the most important things I've learned in 44 years of ministry. Forgiveness is the ability to let go of the need to have the past be any different from the way it was. Forgiveness is the ability to let go of the need to have the past be any different from the way it was. Now, there's a larger progression to all that, but that's an aspect of it that I'd like you to think about. And I want to quickly rehearse the story of the prodigal son, and then we'll have a quick meditative practice. Most of you know the story of the prodigal son. If you don't, though, or if you've forgotten a detail or two, the prodigal son involves a parent and two children, two sons. The younger son says, "Father, I would like to have my share of the forgiveness, of the..." I would like to have my share of, yeah, it's good, I like that.
Yeah.
My share of my inheritance. And so he gets it, and he goes to what the text refers to as a distant country. We've all been in our own distant countries, right? And he wastes it. Runs out of money, starts to beg and so forth, and realizes he needs to get a job, and he gets a really awful job. And finally he thinks, maybe if I went back home, my father would give me a position as a servant or even a slave on the farm. And so he goes home. And what happens? Instead of being punished, the parent greets him with open arms and says, "Let's have a party." So what has happened here? I mean, this is one thing that I think this story says, because Jesus tells it, of course, in the text. Jesus is trying to help us to see this is the way the Holy One intends to deal with us. Now, the story doesn't end there. It goes on and talks about the older son who is still in his own distant country because he can't understand why the party's being given. But that part of the story ends with the phrase, "and they began to celebrate." So very quickly now, I'd like you to get into a comfortable seated position. And very, very gently, sit up straight, close your eyes, and breathe in and breathe out. and notice your breath, and begin to meditate on the phrase, "and they began to celebrate," keeping in mind the framework of the story of the prodigal son. Very slowly and carefully, as you breathe in and breathe out, repeat the phrase, "and they began to celebrate." And the idea is to live down into that and begin to feel that cause for celebration. So, breathe in, breathe out, and they began to celebrate. So now as you conclude this, continue to notice your breathing and very carefully and slowly open your eyes. And be here. Normally we would spend probably 20 minutes on an exercise or a practice like that, but we just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of how something like that might work.
And if you did allow 20 minutes, you'd find yourself levitating.
One of the things that happens in interfaith movements, and what increasingly is being seen as an intra or interspiritual movement, is the capacity to learn from each other's traditions. Before I knew there was such a thing as Jewish meditation, I learned meditation in Buddhist and Zen Buddhist and Hindu traditions. Meditation was not something that was ever talked about in rabbinical school. I suspect that in a strange kind of way, spirituality is as absent in many seminary settings as it is in medical settings, which may strike you as odd. But both, at least the rabbinical school I went to, which was 5.5 years postgraduate, and medical school are heavily academic focuses, and you guys at least get to read books that are in English. After I went to rabbinical school, some years later I went back to graduate school in psychology. And I just couldn't identify with the students who were complaining about all the work because the books were all in English. So within Jewish tradition, one of the practices, like there's a prayer to be recited upon awakening every day. Before one does anything else, the words one says, Modeh ani lefanecha in the Hebrew, means in English,
I thank you, living and eternal being, for you have mercifully restored my soul within me. Your faithfulness is great.
Now you wonder why I turned to my Christian colleague to give you the translation, just as an illustration of how sometimes we absorb practices from another tradition into our own lives. Pastor Don and his wife Judy recite that, the English translation of that prayer, every morning.
Amen. Yeah.
And that's how you got so tall, I think. No, he was this short little guy. Now, on a spiritual level, it's not just about reciting words when one awakens. It's about starting a day with gratitude. And most of you know that the energy of consciousness with which we approach our day, or with which we approach each other, has an impact on the nature of our experience, and has an impact on the nature of how the activities wind up unfolding over the space of a day. Gratitude itself is a basic spiritual practice. It changes us. So not only to use it as a statement in the morning or as a focus of meditation, as I will demonstrate in a moment, but to keep a gratitude journal. And this is something that a lot of us recommend to those we see for counseling. And it's also something that can be done in medical settings. To invite people, one of the difficulty with, both of us, if you take a psychotherapist or a clergy person or a physician, very few people make appointments with us and come into our offices to tell us how great they're doing. We are magnets, purposefully, but we are magnets for people to come in and tell us what's wrong. Often they come in with various levels of anxiety and fear about either what's wrong or what might be wrong or might be the consequences of what might be wrong. So to encourage a gratefulness practice, a gratitude practice, can sometimes help people create a more balanced foundation in their experience of themselves and in their experience of their lives. I don't know what the level of anxiety is here amongst the student body. The graduate schools I've been to.
Seems pretty calm at the moment. But.
Well, that's because we're here.
Okay.
And we've kind of... but you might find a gratitude journal to be helpful yourselves. Just to remember the myriad blessings without which we could not be where we are. So this is a combination of a Jewish practice of gratefulness and a more universal meditation called mindfulness. The essential meditation of mindfulness is to calm oneself and to be aware with a totally accepting consciousness of whatever comes into the mind. Whatever sensations are experienced in the body, whatever thoughts come up in the mind, whatever judgments, whatever story we find ourselves telling ourselves, whatever arises, to greet with acknowledgement and acceptance, and in this case, with gratitude. And the gratitude is conveyed simply with the words thank you. So the meditation is a very simple one. And I'm going to sit down because I really can't meditate standing up.
Guess we can sit too.
And you don't need to see me for this anyways, because it's easiest if you close your eyes. And remind yourselves that the way of this practice is simply to greet each thought, or to greet each sensation, or to greet each judgment, or to greet each fragment of a story, or to greet each image with the response, thank you, and then to let it go. And if it reappears, thank you, and let it go. And watch how the mind provides a never-ending stream of thoughts, of conversations, of judgments, to which we can say, thank you, accepting, acknowledging, releasing. So take a few moments now. Allow yourselves to settle into a space you know that is calm, quiet. You might notice some place in the body where there already is calmness. And as you notice that, silently greet that calmness with thank you. You might notice some place in the body where there is discomfort or where there is tension, and simply notice. And greet that with thank you. And practice thanking every thought, every word, every image. Thank you. and take a gentle breath. And when you're ready to open the eyes, open your eyes with an internal thank you.
Thank you, Brother Ted. This wonderful Islamic mystic and sage who says that we human beings, we're like fish out of water, thrashing and quivering on the banks. And from time to time, we need to dive into those life-giving waters. And this is really about a connection with what is called the source. Whatever you believe the source is. In Islamic mysticism, it's also a cry from within for healing, for empowerment, for transformation by connecting to myself. Because the Quran says, for example, Allah is Zahir and Batin, outside of you and inside of you. How many of you here know the 13th century sage Rumi? Oh, okay, great. I'm a Rumi junkie, as it were. He's a wonderful sage. He says, for example, you are a ruby. You are a ruby in the midst of granite. You're a ruby in the midst of granite. How long will you continue to deceive us? For we can see the look in your eyes. So please return to the root of the root of the root of your real self. He puts another way. He said, Jamal, you wear so many masks in your life. Remove those masks. Remove those masks. You'll find your real face is so beautiful. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, know thyself, and you shall know thy sustainer. So who am I? That's a very important question. You know, there's a wonderful story of the mullah who goes to China for a financial transaction. And after talking to the bank officer says, sir, can you prove your identification to prove who you say you are? What does the mullah do? He reaches into his pocket. He takes out a pocket mirror and peers into it, says, yep, that's me all right. I certify that. Here is this lifelong quest to find the real me. It is really a search for connecting to the source. Call it God, call it Jesus, call it Elohim, Krishna, Buddha, which is outside of us, which we connect to through service, and also inside of us. And this is best done in silence. In Islam we say, silence is the language of God. Everything else is a poor translation. And here's another very important point about silence. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of the little self. So I'll just start you on a meditation of connecting to my real self, and I want to say this wonderful, it's called Hadith Qudsi, a saying of the Prophet Muhammad. In this case, he had a revelation in a dream, where God told him in a dream, actually told Prophet David, and Prophet Muhammad was relating that, he saw that in a dream, that God said to each one of us, God says, beloved one, God says, I cannot be contained in the space of the earth. I cannot be contained in the space of the heavens, but I can be contained in the space of the pure, loving heart of my servant. So in Islamic spirituality, sometimes it's called Sufism, this portion of the human is the most important part of a human being's area for everything. Healing, empowerment, transformation, because divine heart is in human heart. So without further talking, close your eyes. One more time. As you close your eyes, please focus on your nostrils and simply be present with your breath. As you inhale and as you exhale, just this much. Keep it simple. Mindfulness of the breath, moment to moment to moment, please. And now let go of this. And this time, keep eyes closed, focusing attention on your physical heart. If it pleases you, you can use your hand or hands to touch your heart. See if you can touch your heart and just feel your heart. Our heart has been yearning, aching, thirsting to connect with us. Just simply feel the heart, if it works for you. And now with the ears of the heart, listen to this beautiful revelation where God tells you, or the source tells you, whatever your belief system allows. The source says, I cannot be contained in the space of the earth. I cannot be contained in the space of the heavens, but I can be contained in the space of the pure, loving heart of my servant. Just being with that. And here comes the Islamic spiritual technique. No matter how awkward it feels, please, just for today, try it. Tell the heart, within which is divine heart, tell that mysterious space in your own words with feeling, I love you. Or may I love you? How may I love you? Please allow me to love you. Say it unabashedly, no matter how awkward it might feel. And then, using your own words, thank you. I am so grateful. Thank you. I am so grateful. Carry on this mantra infusion with feeling, with sincerity, in humility. For me, what works is, I love you. Thank you. I am so grateful. Again and again and again and again. Try it. As you keep saying those words, a very divine vibration of healing and empowerment is going from the tongue into the mouth, into the throat, into the chest, deep into the heart, even deeper into what is called the hidden, and then mysteriously going into the hidden of the hidden, astonishingly, healing us, loving us, transforming us. And now, just be still. Stop any words for a few seconds. Be with the heart. And now I'll count numbers. Number one, slowly, easily, gently coming into awareness. Number two, feeling a divine vibration of healing coursing its way through you. Number three, feeling and becoming aware of, connecting with a divine vibration of empowerment coursing its way through you. Number four, becoming aware that we are the beloved of the beloved. All is perfectly well, no matter how it seems. And number five, at your convenience, ever so gently, opening your eyes. Take your time, please.
One of the interesting things that we continue to experience is what happens to the energy in a room when we do even a brief period of meditation. I don't know how many of you are aware, just consciously aware of how different the energy is right now. It kind of smooths. And what happens in a essentially spiritual consciousness is that the kind of radical separateness we experience starts to be diminished. It's almost like the veils start to be pulled away. And we are able to sense like a rift in that separateness, in the perception, in the belief, in the insistence of our separateness, and begin to appreciate from the inside out the life we share, the presence we share, the being we share, the consciousness we share. So we are going to invite your questions, but first we're going to sing to you. I know you didn't expect that. I would say neither did we, but actually we did. The Interfaith Amigos have a song. We should also say that, we didn't start out working together as the Interfaith Amigos. We didn't have a name for our enterprise, and I don't know how many years, I suppose it was around the time we got labeled the Three Amigos by a cover article. We appeared on the cover of Christian Century magazine in August of 2008. And then we discovered that the Three Amigos is the name of an old movie that a lot of us didn't particularly like. And once we got boycotted when we spoke at Seattle University. The law department boycotted us because in that Three Amigos movie, Hispanics were not portrayed compassionately. So we decided that calling ourselves the Three Amigos was not going to help. So Interfaith Amigos kind of came as a rebranding. It's been semi-successful. It's a lot easier to brand than to rebrand. We always say that had we known, we would have been working together almost 13 years after we started. One of us would have been a woman. And it would have been Don.
Because there are more women in my tradition available for this work.
I mean, it wasn't personal?
No. But the challenge is for us as three men to keep a feminine sensibility as high and as visible as possible, and to work toward that very badly needed balance of masculine and feminine energies, which is still present in a deeply patriarchal world.
Now, I should say to the sound person, we're going to get together right now and sing together, so that if there's a way of turning off perhaps the middle mic. I don't know where I'm looking.
There, he's right there.
Ah, and you can do it from right there.
First the words first.
Yes, yes, the song has words. Look, the Interfaith Amigos song has words in Arabic, in Hebrew, and in English. The Arabic is
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of God, boundlessly compassionate, infinitely merciful. La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God, meaning it's all one.
And the Hebrew is Adonai Hu Ha-Elohim Hu. The absolute transcendent one awakens within each one of us as the divine presence. That is the one. And the English
is, it's all one. And I am as I am, which means it's all one, and I am as I am.
You laugh. It took him a while to get that. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. La ilaha illallahu. La ilaha illallahu. Adonai Hu Ha-Elohim Hu. Adonai Hu Ha-Elohim Hu. It's all one and I am as I am. It's all one and I am as I am. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if any of you have difficult questions, those goes to Imam Jamal.
It's a very good question, actually, and I think it's very critical, simply whether as physicians or somebody who wants to provide consolation and nurturance and help, to be simply present. In Islam, the word Islam means to surrender in peace. And it's a very difficult process to surrender. In fact, nobody wants to surrender because the work is very inconvenient. They say there are two veils, health and wealth. When health is good, wealth is there, not just financial security, also emotional security. All this talk about spiritual practices, being present, being grateful, being centered, polishing the heart, as Muslims say, is not only irrelevant, very inconvenient until one of those veils shatter, as they will in everybody's life. Somebody has cancer, emotional insecurity. Then questions arise, what is going on? These are spiritual questions. Why me? And the most important question the Quran suggests is, I need help. But I need help from a source higher than human personality or a human institution. That's where you and I can be of help, of just being present and somehow allowing that person to get in touch with those resources that are greater than human personality. Anything else, other resources are very useful, but that is a primary resource I personally have found people crave for.
I'll just mention an aspect of this because I agree it's a terrifically important question, and listening and being present is part of the pastoral issue, and you are playing a pastoral role at that point. We were talking the other night and then on the plane yesterday, thinking about the question of healing and the intersection of our vocations here, about how for a very large part of the medical community, death appears to be a failure. And I think from a spiritual point of view, that's not true. It can be sad and tragic and so forth, but there is something, from a spiritual point of view, there is something in death that may mean something even the opposite of failure. And of course, we don't know what that means, but at least from our traditions, there's a sense that life does not end with death, that it may be a very important healing moment. But you're so right, most people are not literate even in their own traditions, to say nothing of anybody else's. And one of the things that we keep saying is that we keep quoting Gandhi, who said we should have an appreciative understanding of at least one other tradition other than our own, including our own, of course, because of the ways in which that tradition can shine light on our own traditions. But in the moment of crisis, it may be too late for that. And so again, you're playing a very pastoral role in listening and being present.
One of the things that's happening in, I think, both psychology as well as medicine is allowing questions about faith traditions to be part of intake interviews. You know, where we used to shy away from those kinds of questions. But it seems to me that it needs to be part of the portfolio, of the picture that a physician builds up concerning a particular person you're seeing, so that you have some grounding if that person's affiliated or not affiliated, if spirituality is a part of their experience or if it's not part of their experience. One of the difficulties with spirituality, as opposed to like some kind of rote belief, which is really different, is that spirituality kind of requires a practice. You don't suddenly turn on to that kind of consciousness, and that's one of the reasons we encourage, particularly medical practitioners, to have some kind of personal practice, so you know that place from the inside out. When a person's in crisis, as you described, when there is bad news to be transmitted, where a death has happened, our experience is that those are not the times for theological discussions. Those are the times for simply being present and simply being with. It's a time you can invite somebody to share what what's going on in them. You know, if they turn inward, it's a time when you want expression. But the time for some kind of theological conversation is later. So one of the things I kept waiting to hear in rabbinical school was, what do you say to someone when? And it was, of course, I never got that course, because it's not like that. And over the years, I think all of us have experienced it's really not a matter of what one says. It's a matter of being present. So sometimes touch can be far more comforting than any kind of words. Sometimes words, we hide behind our words as if somehow our words are going to protect us from the immediacy of the feeling. And that's really not helpful. We want to support the immediacy of the feeling moment, and we want to support that person, with our presence. So every physician in such a position needs to have referral sources. Like to whom do you refer if a person is of a particular faith? That's why a lot of hospital settings will have chaplains. Most medical offices do not. But where, to give that person those resources, because most of you as physicians are not going to be able to serve as that kind of counselor role. It kind of doesn't fit into both time demands as well as financial concerns.
Brother Ted, I just want to add one thing, because you reminded me of one of my most important lessons in life I ever learned about this. I was with a lady named Janet Turner who was very, very ill, and I used to go to her and recite Rumi and say some very wise things. And one day she held my hands and said, Jamal, thank you so much for your even chanting, your beautiful words, but I just want you to be present with me. And I said, tell me more, Janet. She said, if you feel awkward, please be awkward. That is most healing to me. If you want to say something, say something. That is most healing to me. If you want to be If you're speechless, be speechless. That is most healing to me. And when she said that, I realized what it means to be present.
What are your thoughts on political on political movements like Barry Lynn's Americans United for Separation of Church and State? I'm just curious as to whether you think that this is purposeful and meaningful in terms of what your goals are and what you're trying to do.
Jamal?
It's good you look to me, because most people think that Muslims believe there should be no separation between church and state. It's not necessarily true. And most people point out to me, look at Iran. The clerics are in power in Iran. But do you know that in the entire course of Islamic history, this is the very first time ever that clerics, religious leaders, have been in political power. This is not the norm, actually. I personally, this is just my personal view, I believe in the separation of church and state. That's my personal view.
I think historically in this country, the separation or the suggested need for separation is so that the institutions of government and religion don't have undue influence on each other as institutions. But it doesn't mean that the values of religion and spiritual wisdom cannot be brought to bear on the political decisions that are being made every day. And I think people forget that when they hear separation of church and state. And especially, well, it's especially true in churches when people say, I don't want to hear any sermons about politics. I mean, Jesus was a political person, and that was a big part of his ministry. So it's the institutions that can provide the problem, but the wisdom can actually be part of the healing.
You know, as a Jewish person, I am very aware of the negative consequences of the political power being invested in a religious authority. And I say that not only because over the centuries of Christian rule, the Jewish community fared very poorly, but even the degree to which the politics in Israel is now being influenced by an ultra-Orthodox minority. You probably noticed that the three of us have decided, each of us have decided not to be president of the United States. At least I've decided.
Did we say, okay.
I worry when it's almost like there's a difference between value and belief. And the values of, let's take the values that Jesus taught, or the values that the prophets taught, or the values that the Quran teaches, of taking care of the poor, of taking care of those who are homeless, of taking care of those who are having difficulty, of providing medical care for everyone who is in need. I mean, these are basic faith values that I think can inform the political arena. However, belief systems, the beliefs get us in terrible difficulties and find us in a culture that is bifurcated and polarized. So I don't know if that's if any of these responds directly to your question, but none of us would like to see political power vested in religious authority, and each of us worries when the beliefs, even the beliefs of the majority, can require adherence of the entire population.
It's amazing how Christianity as an institution over the years has drifted toward siding with the domination system, whatever it might be, whether it's the Roman Empire or the Holy Roman Empire or whatever. And that's the institution eclipsing the substance of Jesus' teachings.
I'm going to follow up on that end-of-life question that you had initially, and ask if you could make any recommendations or suggestions for our students who may be in a situation where they need to give bad news, and they're with somebody who either doesn't know their spirituality or has none. You know, the majority of American culture is taught, even if they are religious or spiritual, taught to, you know, rage against the dying of the light. How do you overcome that in a situation where it's very clear that that needs to be overcome? How do you overcome that block?
The interesting thing is, you know, the work of people like John Kabat-Zinn, which is coming out of a medical setting, the practice of mindfulness meditation and its benefit not only in emotional care but in physical care. There is enough available now, like on CD or online, that can lead people through guided meditations to teach them what calmness and relaxation is about, and to teach them beyond the confines of any specific tradition. I mean, we are learning too much scientifically about the interface of spirituality and healing, and about spirituality and wholeness and health, to ignore that in our work. You know, you walk, I was just in a dermatologist's office, and I noticed that there's a whole stack of different kind of brochures telling me all the horrible things can go wrong with my skin. And I can pick them up and I can read them and see what they look like. And I was thinking, where's the one that talks about mindfulness meditation? Where's the one, I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about where's the one that talks about creating an inner environment to help healing? Where are those brochures? And they can be there, not to support any particular institution, but stuff is really available. If you've got a smartphone, there are apps that can be very helpful for people in situations of illness, in situations of disease, even in situations of grief, you know, that you can just carry right with you.
Right. But you know, to add on to that, I want to say, very critical also, again from my limited experience, that when I have broken this news, that this is what the doctor says, what has been most helpful is when I have also participated in creating an authentic community for that person. Just as it takes a village to raise a child, I am 100% convinced it takes a village to have a happy death. So if I can truly, from my heart, work on creating what in Islam we say circle of love for that person, that is going to be of the ultimate help. Then that person will really appreciate and be at peace with a happy death.
We can only begin to try to imagine what it would be like to be in your shoes in a circumstance like that, and to wonder what help can be brought to bear. We have come to think of anything that gives a person's life purpose and meaning and wishes to contribute to the common good is a spiritual path. And it might be that if that person could talk a little bit about purpose and meaning, you might get a clue as to which place to send that person. And in whatever community you're in, it would be good for you to have some acquaintance with those traditions, wherever you are. Know those religious leaders, be able to call them and so forth, because you're right, this is a moment when support is needed, comfort is needed, wisdom is needed. Yeah.
More and more, we've experienced hospitals having programs where they invite clergy in to talk to the nurses and to talk to the physicians and to talk to all those who, I mean, the lines are, the communication is more open now than it's ever been. An awful lot of people are nuns. I don't know how many of you are nuns. Nuns are those people who check the box that says nun, where it says, what is your religious affiliation? And there's a significant number of people, the two groups, religious groups, I suppose you'd say, that are growing in this country. One is the ultra-conservative, the fundamentalist groups, and the other is the nuns. And it's almost growing like a balance to the other. But the people, the nuns need as much spiritual support as those who generally, the people over here already have a well-developed community.
Right.
Generally, the nuns are discovering how to create a community.
The nuns, which you just pointed out, are the ones that the students said, well, what do you do for a nun? When they're coming asking for help and they're hurting, they're in pain, they're suffering. Any thoughts about that, regardless of what the physician's spirituality is or faith group, or even with none there as well, but having a need to help the mind, body, spirit through this process?
We almost as a joke, we say it's just a question of faith. And we say that, say in my own congregation, I have some agnostics and atheists, and they do have faith. They believe in what we call God. They just call God by different name. They call it truth, justice, compassion, humanity. And this joke I always tell is about this atheist father who tells his son, there is no God. And the son says, Father, how do you know? Son is trained to question. Father, how do you know? And father says, son, you got to take it on faith. So to get together with those people who believe in the truth, who believe in compassion, the most important thing I find, and last year I worked with at least 3 people who said after they were so shocked by the news they got, and they said there were so many, of course we know all the different stages, the last one I worked with told me that the most difficult thing was to hear the news. But he said after that, when I found that community that stayed with me in an abiding sense, it can't be just ad hoc, 1 day, 2 days, it takes patience. But once that community was created that will stay with that person was so happy to experience what I have always been told by these friends, I am going to die a happy death, a happy death. And just by the way, those 3 persons have asked me to give poetry, and I've always given this Rumi poetry, which they have loved. They say, always tell this to someone after they have their happy community. Rumi says, every death is very beautiful. But you'll only experience this if you have that circle of love with you consistently. And the poetry is, how marvelous was the way you quit the world. The way you ruffled your feathers and breaking free of your cage, you took off for your soul's world. A love-sick nightingale, among owls. You caught the scent of roses and flew to the rose garden. People like poetry at those times.
I think our normal consciousness and our cultural focus seems to support our identification with our body, so that who I am is this. And as this ages, as this changes, as this gets ill, as this gets better, as this doesn't get better, the I that's totally associated with this is threatened. Spiritual practice of whatever kind, what we call spiritual practice, whether it's within a tradition or without any specific tradition, starts to expand the boundaries of our I-ness. It's like opening our eyes. We're opening our identity. And as we open our identity, meditation is one of the ways. I see meditation as one of the practices for dying. It's like, what are you going to do when you're in if you're conscious and you know you're dying? What are you going to do in your head? Start screaming? You know, which a lot of people do because we just wind up in terror. Or have we been practicing enough to have an inner awareness that this is not all I am? That this is a particular manifestation of a universal consciousness. This is a particular instance of something that is far greater than this. Whether you want to call it soul, whether you want to call it greater self, higher self, divinity, whatever labels. To the extent we've had some practice, it can be extraordinarily helpful when we get into that place. Does that mean our ego won't stimulate fear? No. It just means that there's something on the other side of that. That's what presence will ignite if it's there. We've seen people, we just recently essentially saw somebody die in incredible joy. And we've seen people die in desperate fear. It's a lot easier without all the fear. There's a line in Jewish tradition that one is supposed to say at the moment of death. The line is the proclamation of oneness. It's a biblical verse, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. Essentially, listen, Israel, the eternal one is our God, the eternal one is absolute oneness. And the ancient rabbis said, well, if you're supposed to say this at the moment of your death, how do you know when the exact moment of your death is? And the answer was right. This is to become like a mantra. This is to become like a focus for meditation, a scriptural focus for meditation, so that at that moment we can remind ourselves there's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere else to go. All there ever is here. And this here now is, we are looking at it through a specific body, in a specific time, and in a specific place. But one would honor the consciousness to ask the question, okay, what is the next here going to be? And I don't want to go into fanciful things about heaven and that kind of stuff. I just mean, what's the consciousness once it's released from the body? Many of us who practice meditation over a significant period of time have had moments of leaving the body. Well, how is that going to be different? And I'm not saying it's not or it's going to be, but it's a space of relaxing into something and noticing, being mindful so that whatever happens, one can literally say thank you. But these are really excellent questions. This is specifically exactly why we were excited to come to this place.
So expect to see yourself in print.